Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Do you just want to start by introducing yourself and why you're running?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Rachel Ruttenberg. I live here in Evanston. I am running for the Illinois State Senate in the 9th State Senate District, and it's currently Laura Fine's seat, but she's vacating the seat because she's running for Congress with many other people. So I am, I've lived in Evanston for 10 years. I grew up in the northern suburbs. My two girls go to the public schools here in District 65 at Dewey. I have a master's from Northwestern and I'm a lawyer. And it was actually after I graduated from my master's program at Northwestern that I got my first job at Chicago Public Schools. And there I witnessed firsthand the deep inequities in our public school systems. I traveled from school to school working on technology projects, and it really impressed upon me that we have made an intentional public policy decision over decades that has resulted in deep inequities, and for so many of our schools to feel under-resourced, to not have the morale and the community and the safety around them. And so I wanted to do something about it. I went to law school at night, and when I graduated from law school, I got my first job as an attorney in the Illinois House working on legislation to improve our public schools and the K-12 and higher education committees. So I am the person with a track record, the kinds of issues and legislation that I've worked on and championed over the years, and that deep experience and my passion for public service and the myriad experiences I've had through the years working on different kinds of intersectional social and economic issues really propelled me to take the plunge and run for this seat. I felt like I could represent Evanston well, and I could bring my experience to bear to help us navigate the deep, deep challenges that we have in the next couple of years and into the future.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, the current state senator, Laura Fine, is running for Congress, and that's a race that has kind of overshadowed your own race for the state Senate seat. This is actually the first time that this seat has had a contested Democratic primary, at least this century. When you're speaking to voters, how familiar are they with this race and even what the role of a state senator is?
Sure. So excellent question. And also, I want to give a shout out to the RoundTable for covering this race since day one, which has been incredibly helpful. But it has been a really significant challenge to get the word out that this race is happening and who the candidates are for it and the importance of it. I have been knocking doors since June, all the way until just yesterday, and the conversation has not changed. I am introducing to people for the first time that we have an open state Senate seat, that this will be a representative in Springfield, that there are many other things on the ballot this year, but that they should give some time and attention to this race and to their choices. And people are grateful for the education. And so, to be honest with you, that just continues to be the communication. This race exists. This is who I am. These are my credentials and my qualifications, and let's talk about what's important to you and how I can partner with my community to represent us in Springfield.
Yeah, and if elected, how would you approach engaging with constituents and staying accessible throughout your time in office?
Sure. So I've had the amazing pleasure of working with a lot of nonprofit organizations as an advocate in Springfield. And what I really hope to bring to this role is to be a champion for some of the community organizing and movement building work that I have had the privilege of working on through the years. And that means partnering with people who are directly impacted by issues to empower them to work together on solutions to some of our toughest problems. So, for example, I've had the privilege of working with formerly incarcerated leaders to be able to provide some transparency on how Springfield works, how state legislation impacts our lives, and then work with folks on bills to write legislation, draft it, work with communities and understand what the potential impacts of that legislation would be, and then make it happen down in Springfield. And for example, the organization that now has some of those formerly incarcerated leaders of it, just were the absolute leaders in having the Clean Slate Act passed just this fall in Springfield. So I'm really looking forward to bringing some of that energy and working alongside directly impacted people. What that could look like in Evanston is working with, a group of youth advisors, working with some folks who are involved with our school systems who, we obviously have been facing significant challenges in District 65, but of course in our other schools as well across Evanston, working with parents who are facing really significant challenges maybe with their children and healthcare concerns. I hear people's stories every single day as I'm walking door to door and meeting folks. And it is a privilege, but it's also a responsibility to carry those stories and those experiences and actually help people in a way where we can make an impact together in Springfield.
So both the current incumbent, Laura Fine, and her predecessor in the seat, Daniel Biss, are both running for the congressional primary further up the ballot. If elected, how long do you envision staying in this seat and staying in Springfield? And do you ever see yourself considering a run for higher office, or is this kind of the world that you want to exist in?
Yeah, it's a great question. And honestly, Jeff Schoenberg, Daniel Biss, Laura Fine, these are some big shoes to fill in this seat. We've had quite a legacy of different kinds of leaders, but leaders who I think I can say with some amount of certainty have had a really big impact and have really, really fought to bring Evanston and Ninth District values to Springfield. So I am looking forward to continuing to be a part of that legacy. I also know myself and the world in which I wish to operate and how I want to operate. I am not a person that is interested in running for mayor because it's open and it might be fun to be called mayor. I am not interested in, other roles at this point. I know Springfield. I know how to be an advocate, a lawyer. I know how to bring folks from our communities down there and how to make an impact. And so I'm absolutely focused on this seat, the mission of this seat, and the impact this seat can have, and to maximize that for all of us.
Yeah, so this campaign for the state Senate has been very evenly matched up to this point, to the point that some groups have actually co-endorsed both you and your opponent, Patrick Hanley, in a two-person race. What's a quality or aspect of you and your approach that you feel differentiates you? And then parallel, is there any policy stance that you have that you feel differentiates you?
Sure. So when you announce for to run in an election, you don't kind of know what your opponent is going to come out with in terms of their platform. And it has been interesting to see that my opponent has mimicked my policy platform a little bit over time, certainly stands for so many of the progressive values that I also stand for. I think that's great news for us, right? Because either way, we will have a progressive champion. What continues to distinguish me in this race are my credentials and my track record of getting things done, of writing, passing, negotiating legislation, and moving us forward as a state. That is something that continues to resonate with people, especially in those one-on-one conversations with voters. And I look forward to bringing that experience to Springfield for all of us.
Yeah, if elected, your first 2 years in office will be under the federal administration of President Donald Trump, and Illinois and other blue states are increasingly taking action to separate themselves from federal policies and protect against federal funding cuts. How would you legislate at the state level in this federal context, especially considering that you'd be a member of a Democratic supermajority, presumably in both chambers of the General Assembly?
Sure. So in my most recent role as Deputy Chief of Staff at Cook County, one of the things that I was responsible for was our strategy for preparing for the second Trump administration. And I am hoping to bring some of those skills and that purview to our strategy for the Illinois General Assembly as well. I will be the only Democratic female attorney in the state Senate. And I do think we need a really tight strategy that coordinates between our litigation efforts with the Attorney General's office and across blue states, as well as with our municipalities and our counties. And we need to codify everything we can at the state level that will help secure Illinois in terms of our civil and constitutional rights. that is, how I believe that we can really push back and keep us safer over the next couple of years. I also know that the massive federal cuts that we're facing or and are already starting to experience, that pain is going to feel worse and worse over the next year and a half as more than 300,000 people will fall off their health insurance for various reasons. We will have disability programs closing, programs for elderly folks, really facing a lot of challenges. This social safety net is one that has typically layered federal dollars, grant dollars with state dollars, sometimes local and nonprofit sector dollars as well. I know that more than anyone because I have had roles both in the nonprofit and the government sector trying to balance those budgets, put those programs together, and make sure we're layering those investments appropriately. When we have our financial rug pulled out from under us with the feds pulling out, it's really going to create a challenge to triage in the short term what we can all do together to try to cover some of those gaps. We're certainly not going to be able to pay for everything. The state just doesn't have the deep pockets of the federal government. But I do think because politically and values wise, we tend to be aligned jurisdictionally at the local, county, and state level. There's an opportunity to folks to tighten that collaboration and work together to try to triage and fill what we can in the meantime while we're fighting and litigating to get some of those resources back from the feds.
Yeah. So turning to more local issues, the district is highly connected to Chicagoland's public transit systems. You mentioned in your questionnaire response the push and desire to build new Evanston stations on the CTA's Yellow Line, for example. This kind of project would be just one of many that are competing for investment under the new Northern Illinois Transit Authority that is currently being created and implemented. How would you balance in-district investments like those Yellow Line stations with stabilizing and improving the transit system as a whole across the region?
Sure. So similar to how I was describing our social service cuts and our healthcare program cuts, I think the same is going to be true with any large infrastructure investment that we're attempting to make. Typically, those have some layered investment and some money coming from the feds. And we will really, in the short term, need to balance what our immediate needs are with an eye toward planning for the future in a pragmatic way so that we can continue to chip away and incrementally build so that we can get to those goals. So that would be my approach for our transportation investments as well. I have been really excited about the folks that I've met, especially in Evanston, who are like true advocates for our public transit. The Evanston Transit Alliance is just like a wonderful group of people. And I've seen them at events and now I've met them at their doors and they've really opened my eyes to what, new Yellow Line stations could do for this community in this area and the 9th State Senate District as a whole. I also am really excited about the collaboration and the coordination of our transit across platforms, meaning the additional bus service in very strategic ways so that we can just improve access across the board. As a state senator, you really are plugged into what legislation you can be passing in Springfield to make some of these projects better, centering some of our values and our dollars in the right way, because I do believe budgets are moral documents and that's how we should approach budgeting. And I do know that you can, use some influence and partnership to work with local partners, to work with the Chicago Transit Agency, to work with Metra, to work with all these folks as they're standing up this new infrastructure to make sure that it makes sense as a whole. And you can also look locally and make sure we're having our needs met and that we're laying that foundation for the future.
And so you do see party role as being an advocate for like local investments within the district, and not just Evanston. That's one part of the district, but the other metro lines and other stations that run through bus access, as you said. It'd be
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think I could be a really helpful partner in that, given my experience in local government and with nonprofits as well.
Yeah. So you mentioned the budget. Illinois faces numerous financial challenges right now, not just from the current federal climate, but also from deeper issues with the state's revenues and obligations. In particular, Illinois has fairly high taxes under regressive structures, something that you alluded to in your questionnaire response. You know, Governor Pritzker pushed for a constitutional amendment to allow for a graduated income tax in 2020. That referendum failed at the time by a 53-47 margin. But entering the legislature now in 2027, if elected, would you support another campaign for this amendment or another one like it that ends the requirement for a flat income tax?
I absolutely would. I worked with the Fair Tax Coalition the first time around in my role at Heartland Alliance with my team, and there were certainly some missteps. And reflecting, the misstep of having this being done during a global pandemic was also a huge challenge. But we can take those lessons learned. We can also leverage the now, I believe, immense political capital of our governor, that he just didn't have the political capital he does now in Illinois, as well as the commitment of our legislature to take a go at it again. I think it's really crucial that we urgently look at all of the structural progressive revenue solutions that we can, and that we stop kicking the can down the road, so that we can fix our short-term challenges, triage some of the critical needs we will have coming up in the next 2 or 3 years, but really lay a really smart foundation for the future.
Governor Pritzker also recently proposed a new funding plan to deal with the state's outstanding pension debt. What approach or strategy would you want to take in Springfield to handle the pension debt long term? And who should bear the greatest cost of that approach, or how should it mix out between taxpayers, future employees, other state programs?
So this is a prime example of what I'm talking about in terms of we have a moment that's urgent, that we know we're going to be facing these significant budgetary challenges. We know Illinois has been climbing out and becoming more financially healthy year after year, and yet we face these massive federal cuts. And so we have both the need to be able to step up a little bit more in terms of what we're paying for, how we're thinking about these investments, but we also now have an urgency that I think can be an opportunity to solve some of our structural challenges. So pension issues, of course, are a large part of it. I was really pleased to see the governor roll out a willingness and a plan for making that happen. I haven't worked on pension issues directly, but I have read some of the Chicago Civic Committee papers on it, and some of the other economic organizations' thoughts on how we restructure pensions moving forward. And I do think like there's just has been a lack of political willingness to do it, not necessarily that there aren't solutions out there. And so I am fairly open to what those solutions look like. And I look forward to learning more about how those can be structured, both to make sure that we are not overburdening people in the short term, and then again laying a smart and healthier foundation for the longer term. But I also, know that there are other states that have successfully done this in recent years, and I look forward to Illinois joining those states.
So it would be an aim of yours to make sure that, like you said, in the short term, whether it's taxpayers or anyone else, that not overburdening it to get out immediately, but wanting to reach long-term stability.
Right. And I do think we have to look at the picture as a whole in terms of those progressive revenue streams that we're able to raise, any, budget cuts we're able to structure, all of these things, in a mix is what we need to be looking at. And I look forward to working with the state Senate on how the state Senate can structure such a solution.
So at the more local level, homeowners and renters alike are feeling the strain of high property taxes, which chiefly go to fund public school districts. Another example of funding plans that were recently proposed in Springfield. But what should the state, what would you do at the state level to help ease property tax burden overall, and specifically with school districts? How should the state provide adequate funding for at the local level for the state school districts?
Right. So this issue of how we fund our public schools is actually what got me into public policy in the first place. I'm extremely passionate about us doing something different. What we're doing is not working. And I continue to think that, if we as District 65 in Evanston, which is a fairly prosperous community, can't structurally figure out how to finance all the things that we need, and this continues to happen about every 10 years where we sort of are in this moment of financial crisis, that communities with far less prosperity, kind of money coming in and out of their community, that's just structurally impossible for them to be able to make ends meet to fund their public schools. And so I also know that Illinois continues to be one of the lowest in terms of direct state investment in our public school systems. I believe 50th last time I checked. And that hasn't changed in the 20 plus years that I've been working in public policy in Springfield. So I do believe there's an opportunity as we look at what Illinois wants to be moving forward to center our education systems more squarely in the middle of our budgets, and to honestly increase the state portion. Property taxes. I have had the pleasure of working on some property tax reform efforts in the last couple of years. I worked with a team when I was at Cook County on a strategy for reforming our Cook County property tax system. And really, all the research and all of the folks we worked with on the data and to look at the inequities across the county, it always led to one thing, which is that, in communities with different kinds of home values, the only way to make sure that you're investing equitably is for money to come from the outside of the taxing body. And we just need more opportunities to be able to structurally do that at the state level, at the local levels. So in addition to I've worked on, for example, efforts in Springfield to try to keep seniors in their homes. That's the direction that we sort of started on the property tax reform work at the county. And so that included, increasing the income threshold for the senior freeze. It also, restructured this program that allows seniors to defer their property tax payments. There are programs out there that already exist that we can be better leveraging in a smart and evidence-based way to try to take the burden off of folks who can't pay their property taxes. Nobody should be at risk of losing their home because they can't pay their property taxes. So while I absolutely appreciate the question of how we're going to solve property taxes at the same time that we're trying to boost our schools and our school funding, I do think that the goal is really to separate the two moving forward. We do need property taxes. We do need the vital government services that they pay for, but communities are so vastly different across the state and even in the 9th State Senate District in terms of their ability to actually have the home value to pay for everything they need. And so decentralizing some of that, taking the pressure valve off a little bit, I think is really important in the coming years. We cannot continue to increase people's property taxes in the local level. We just will drive out families right and left. And honestly, I don't know where they would go.
With supermajorities presumably in the General Assembly,
Yes.
Even within those caucuses, there are a lot of diverging, levels of progressiveness, moderates. But where would you draw your line on what can you find compromise on, make concessions to get a deal done, versus where do you kind of draw your line on I can't compromise or kind of make concessions on this, need to stand on a value or something like that?
Sure. So I think that my approach is one that often can work with diverse people across the board. And I understand that the Democratic caucus is a pretty big tent nowadays, right? But there's a lot of diversity within that. And the things that really I am focused on anytime I'm presented with an issue or a decision, one is just my real focus on equity. Throughout my career, I've just really understood from the beginning how specifically racial equity plays into the consequences of policy and how they play out in the ground in communities. And if a decision or an issue or a bill looks like it would take us further away from advancing racial equity, I would not be a part of that, or I would fight against it and try to stop it. And if we were able to advance racial equity, that would be something I would fully be on board with. So that's one thing that really comes to mind when you ask about where my lines are. Um, I would say the other thing is short-term fixes and long-term fixes, right? Policy making and sustainability, right? And so I am a person who really prides herself on taking the long view and understanding not just how this is going to look 5 years from now, but the implementation of some of these packages that we pass through Springfield. What are the goals? What's the timeline? How are folks on the ground going to feel those impacts? And how are we communicating and being transparent about those impacts to residents? That, again, is something that I always want to be taking the long view. And that will be my approach as well.
So as of last week, mail ballots have started to be sent out. Early voting locally will start at the beginning of March. As people are making their decision in this race, what do you want them to keep in mind?
Sure. I want voters to keep in mind that it may seem that the two candidates for this race are very similar. But one of the candidates, the Evanston candidate, is really focused on the experiences and the impact of what Springfield can do in this moment to fight back against Trump and keep moving our communities forward. And those credentials that I bring, the experience I bring, and honestly, having the privilege of being right here in Evanston and having a wonderful network of friends, neighbors, people from our after-school programs, teachers, that's when I want people to feel familiarity with me and understanding of where my morals and my values sit, and a comfort in knowing that, I will always be a partner in the work that we're trying to do in Springfield.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.